Imagine a state funeral in October 1944. The air is heavy. High-ranking officials stand in silence. The man they honor is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the most famous general of his time. The official story says he died from injuries after a car accident. But the truth, behind closed doors, was much darker. Just hours earlier, two generals visited his home. They didn't bring a doctor. They brought an ultimatum. The message from the capital was clear. End your own life, or your family will be imprisoned. Rommel made his choice. He walked out to their car, and he never returned. For decades, we've been told he was the noble enemy, a genius who fought a clean war. But new evidence from the archives tells a different story. So I have a question for you. If a man serves a brutal regime for over a decade, does a moment of hesitation at the very end redeem him? Or have we all been believing a carefully crafted legend? Today, we're going to look past the propaganda, examine the strategic blunders, and uncover the true nature of the Desert Fox. Let's set the scene. It's 1941, and all eyes are on North Africa. The German leadership desperately needed a hero, someone charismatic who the public could rally behind, not like the old, stuffy generals. Rommel was perfect for the role. As historian David Fraser points out, Rommel knew the power of his image. He would invite news crews to the front lines and even reenact battle scenes to make sure the footage looked heroic. But behind the camera, a massive problem was brewing: logistics. When Rommel first arrived in Africa, his orders from high command were strictly defensive. Hold the line. Why? Because Germany simply didn't have the fuel or trucks to support a major offensive across the desert. But Rommel ignored the math. He attacked almost immediately. The Chief of Staff, General Franz Halder, wrote in his diary about his frustration, calling Rommel's advance reckless. He was stretching his supply lines to the breaking point. The Desert Fox was gambling, driving tanks that were practically running on fumes, just hoping the enemy would break before his fuel gauges hit zero. Was this military genius, or was it dangerous insubordination that ultimately doomed his own men? Here's an interesting paradox. The legend of Rommel was largely built by his enemies, the British. In 1942, British forces were suffering one defeat after another. To explain these losses without admitting their own mistakes, it was much easier to paint the enemy commander as some kind of military god. Winston Churchill himself stood up in the House of Commons and called Rommel a daring and skillful opponent, and a great general. This speech helped create the myth of a so-called clean war in the desert. It got so out of hand that the British general Claude Auchinleck had to issue a formal order to his troops, telling them to stop treating Rommel like a bogeyman or a magician. He saw that his own soldiers were becoming psychologically defeated by the reputation of one man. But the reality was, while Rommel was winning battles, he was losing the war of supply. The British eventually figured out that the Fox could be beaten not by magic, but by simply cutting off his fuel. How much of war do you think is psychological? The real turning point came at El Alamein in 1942. This is where Rommel's gamble finally failed. His forces were deep in Egypt, with their eyes on the Suez Canal, but their supply lines had been stretched to the breaking point. According to logistics expert Martin van Creveld, the German army had literally outrun its ability to be resupplied. They were depending on capturing enemy fuel and food just to survive. When the British launched their massive counteroffensive, the situation became hopeless. Rommel, realizing the battle was lost, requested permission to retreat and save his army. The response from Berlin was a cold, direct order: victory or death, no retreat. This moment broke something in Rommel. He was a loyal officer, but he was watching his army get destroyed. He hesitated for 24 critical hours. At first, he obeyed the order, leading to catastrophic losses. Then, he finally defied the order and commanded a retreat. But for thousands of his men, it was too late. That hesitation cost them their lives. Put yourself in his shoes. You have a direct order from the highest authority, but you know it means sacrificing your men. What is your higher duty? Obedience or saving their lives? Now, let's just talk about the most persistent myth, that the war in North Africa was nightly or completely clean. While it didn't have the scale of atrocities seen on the Eastern Front, modern historians challenge this rosy picture. Historian Raphael Scheck uncovered that during the 1940 campaign in France, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division captured French colonial soldiers from Senegal. Records show that after surrendering, many of these men were treated with extreme prejudice, denied the basic protections given to prisoners of war. Rommel's own diaries even contain racist remarks about them. And in North Africa, it gets even more complicated. Historians Malman and Kuppers found that a special unit, tasked with persecuting the Jewish population, followed Rommel's army. While Rommel didn't command this unit directly, there's evidence his headquarters coordinated with them for logistical support, even using forced labor for construction projects. He may not have given the orders himself, but he operated within a system that allowed these horrors to happen. Does looking the other way make a commander complicit? By 1944, Rommel was in France, in charge of coastal defenses. He knew the war was lost. And this brings us to the biggest controversy. Was he part of the plot to kill Hitler? His chief of staff, Hans Speidel, later claimed Rommel was a central figure in the resistance. This story helped build Rommel's heroic post-war image. But historian Peter Lieb, who studied the Gestapo interrogation files, argues the truth is more complicated. Rommel believed the leader should be arrested and put on trial, not assassinated. He worried that killing him would just turn him into a martyr. Rommel was a soldier who respected authority. He wanted a political solution, not a violent coup. Ironically, before he could do anything, his car was strafed by an Allied plane on July 17th, 1944. He was badly injured and in a hospital when the assassination plot followed 3 days later. Under torture, some of the plotters mentioned his name, and that was all it took for the regime to turn on its most famous general. So we return to that final day in October 1944. The regime couldn't risk putting its biggest hero on public trial. It would have shattered national morale, so they offered him a deal. 2 generals showed up at his home and laid out the terms. Face the people's court, where you'll be disgraced and your family will be imprisoned. Or take the honorable way out. If you do, your family will receive a pension and be safe, and you will be buried as a hero. His son, Manfred, later recalled his father's final words to the family. He said, "I will be dead in 15 minutes," before calmly putting on his coat and leaving the house. He chose to sacrifice himself to protect his family. It's a tragic end. The very system he served so skillfully for years ultimately demanded his death. By accepting their deal, he helped them maintain the Rommel myth right until the very end of the war. He faced a brutal choice. Was his final act one of courage, or was he simply trapped by his own sense of loyalty? What if Rommel had actually won in Africa? Military analysts still debate this. If he had taken the Suez Canal, would it have changed the outcome of the war? Probably not. Historian Robert Citino argues that even with Suez, Germany lacked the industrial power to hold the Middle East. The entry of the United States and the war on the Eastern Front were the real deciding factors. Here is another. What if Rommel had survived and faced trial at Nuremberg? His defense would have been simple. I was just a soldier. But given the documented use of forced labor and the actions of his troops in France, his heroic reputation would have been shattered. He wouldn't be remembered as the legendary Desert Fox, but as another high-ranking official of a criminal regime. His early death preserved his image. Erwin Rommel will always be a complex and controversial figure. He was a brilliant tactician, a charismatic leader, and a devoted family man. But he was not the good German that post-war propaganda wanted us to believe. He was a man who served a monstrous cause with incredible skill, a general who prioritized battlefield victory over the moral reality of the war he was fighting. The Desert Fox was real, but the hero was a construction built by propaganda, reinforced by his enemies, and sealed by his own tragic forced silence. History reminds us that we have to look past the uniform and the medals to see the human choices underneath. What do you think? Was Rommel a victim of his time, or a willing participant who realized his mistake far too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I've listed the historical sources I used for this video in the description below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history.